You know that feeling when a company changes something that didn't need changing? You wonder why they did it. That's exactly how I feel about the Indian Wells courts. And here's something that most sports fans don't think about. Not all tennis courts are created equal. The same surface can play completely differently depending on the balls, the weather, the altitude, even the humidity that day. Players talk about this stuff obsessively. They feel every single variable under their feet. But for decades, and I mean decades, one thing at Indian Wells was never up for debate. The courts were slow, full stop. Balls would kick up high off the bounce. Rallies dragged on forever. Big servers couldn't buy a point. It was the one hard court on tour that practically played like clay. Grinding, physical, relentless. Medvedev famously lost his mind over it more than once.
Freaking court, and they call it hard courts. What a shame to call this awful court a hard court.
Meanwhile, other players like Bianca Andreescu, who won the tournament in 2019, swear by the surface. They're known as some of the slowest hard courts on tour.
Yeah, I think I've had great results on it, and I think that's a big reason why.
Yet, in spite of the mixed opinions, players and fans alike had been pushing for change for years. Nothing happened though, and the tournament held firm, until now. So here's the question that's been eating at me. Why would a tournament throw away the one thing that made it truly unique on the tennis tour? And is this the beginning of the end for slow hard courts in professional tennis? Indian Wells is called the fifth Grand Slam for a reason. This tournament has turned into the gold standard for what a modern tennis event is supposed to look like. Commercially dominant, meticulously run, and absurdly profitable. We're talking 5 decades of building something from scratch. It goes all the way back to 1974, a modest men's event out in Tucson, Arizona. 2 years later, they picked up and moved 372 miles west into California's Coachella Valley, plugging into the ITF Grand Prix circuit. The weather was perfect, the hospitality was unmatched, and the tournament just kept growing. But here's where the geography starts playing tricks on you. The scorching desert air creates conditions that exist almost nowhere else in tennis. The extreme dryness means the ball picks up less air resistance as it travels, so it moves fast through the air and is more likely to be influenced by the wind. But when it hits the court,
honestly, it felt more like a medium-paced hard court to me. And during the day, the speed through the air is faster, and then when it hits the court, it's a little bit more bouncy.
Oh, and to make things even more complicated, the conditions change based on time of day too. So even back in the 90s, Indian Wells was already known as a slow hard court. That reputation was baked into the desert itself. Then came the year 2000, and Indian Wells went all in. The tournament moved into its purpose-built home, the Indian Wells Tennis Garden, a 16,000-seat stadium that was basically a monument to the sport. Oh, and it also became the first Masters 1000 event to stretch out to 12 days. Ambitious, impressive, iconic. But the courts? Even slower. The new plexi-paved surface, custom designed for the tournament, became flat-out notorious. High friction on contact. Higher bounces. Rallies that just didn't end. The grit of the surface combined with the sandy desert wind meant conditions swung wildly between day sessions and night sessions.
The conditions are impossible.
It's no coincidence that Rafa Nadal, the king of clay, won Indian Wells 3 times but never won Miami, which plays considerably faster even with the extreme South Florida humidity. The court either suited your game or it didn't. Players either loved it or completely despised it.
I think they suit my game style really, really well. I like when I have more time to set up the point. And the conditions in the evening, I feel that the ball moves a little bit more. It's not as heavy compared to here when it's a little bit more humid. The balls are a little heavier. But I don't mind either way just because it gives me more time.
For 25 years, that was Indian Wells. Slow, gritty, and unapologetically different. But then everything changed. Ahead of the 2025 BNP Paribas edition, tournament director Tommy Haas announced that they were getting rid of the infamous courts and changing the surface provider from plexi-pave to lake-hold.
We have a lot of complaints over the years about the high bounces, the court's a little bit too gritty, too slow, can we put a little less sand into it?
Now, lake-hold isn't some random new company. These are the same people behind the surfaces at Miami and the US Open, which are known to be quicker hard courts. The official reason for the switch? Better sustainability, improved court consistency, and player welfare. You see, Lakehold uses recycled tennis balls built right into their court system, 10 times greater consistency than the industry standard, and a 10% reduction in injury risk through better cushioning. Legitimate reasons, real benefits. But here's where it gets interesting. Nobody could agree on what had actually changed. See, this change came with the promise that players would find the surface a little faster than in previous years, but that wasn't quite the case. Novak complained about the bounce on center court.
The difference between the center court and the other courts, is immense. The ball is bouncing on the center courts, higher than some of the highest clay courts, to be honest.
Sabalenka also echoed those sentiments, stating that the outside courts were faster than the center court. Medvedev said they were slower, same with Pegula. Iga noticed zero difference. Bianca and Kim said the changes were marginal. How much faster was it this year than last year, say?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to speak.
I think the same for the most part. Maybe 2019, like if I compare it to 2019 was probably a little bit slower.
And then we had Alcaraz, who didn't even understand why the tournament made the sudden change in the first place. So, who was right? Well, looking at the data from the past decade and a half, we can see that the court pace index across the board has generally increased, indicating a desire for faster courts. A lower CPI here indicates a slower court, while a higher one shows a faster court. The difference between this year and last year, a huge jump of almost 8 points. That's not a small tweak. That's a significant shift. Last year, the full qualifying round produced 265 aces across 36 matches on the men's side. This year, almost twice that number. Rally lengths in the early rounds hit their lowest point in the last 5 years. Of course, stats don't paint the whole picture because there are so many other variables at play here, but there's no denying that the court speeds have been so much faster in 2026. In fact, from the data alone, this might be the quickest ever in the tournament's modern history on the current surface. And the bigger picture? The court pace index data across ATP Masters 1000 events has seen the interquartile range of hard court speeds shrink over time, indicating that the middle 50% of tournaments are playing more and more alike. Indian Wells, once the undisputed outlier at the slow end, has been pulled back towards the center of the pack. The change this year was drastic, and now the question isn't whether or not the courts became faster or not. They absolutely did. The real question is, why did the tournament organizers want to make this change in the first place? On the surface, no pun intended, the official answer is simple. The old courts were too slow, too inconsistent, and the new ones are just better for everyone's joints. Fair enough, but that doesn't quite explain why they specifically picked a surface that moves Indian Wells closer to Miami and the US Open in terms of speed. And I'm just gonna say the quiet part out loud here. Tennis tournaments are businesses, full stop. Their revenue comes from ticket sales, broadcast rights, sponsorships, and attendance. And all of those things are tied directly to how deep the biggest names go in the draw. Nobody at the top of this sport is going to come out and say that publicly, but the logic runs itself. When surfaces get homogenized, surface specialists stop thriving. And when surface specialists stop thriving, the same elite names that we see keep going deep week after week. Predictable outcomes, predictable matchups, predictable revenue. Guys, if you like the videos where I break down the hot button issues on tour and do a bit of investigative work myself, you'll definitely want to like and subscribe because I have a lot more coming. Now, think about what tennis used to look like. Pete Sampras was basically unbeatable on fast courts, but every spring, Roland Garros rolled around and suddenly the conversation changed completely. Different players, different styles, different drama. That contrast was genuinely exciting. But now though, surfaces are so similar that you can almost map out the bracket before a ball is even hit. And here's the uncomfortable part. That might entirely be by design. Just look at the pattern. Wimbledon slowed its grass. The Australian Open cycled through multiple surfaces, each time trending towards medium pace. The US Open has tinkered with conditions over the years, same direction. Every major decision has been nudging the tour toward a single, predictable, middle-of-the-road pace. And then there's the money angle. Mid-2025, some of the biggest names in tennis, Sabalenka, Swiatek, Goff, Alcaraz, Sinner, and Draper, sent a letter directly to the 4 Grand Slams demanding that player revenue share rise from 16% to 22% by 2030. They also pushed for pension contributions, health benefits, and maternity support. The numbers they're fighting over are staggering. The Grand Slams pulled in an estimated $1.2 billion in revenue in 2024 and paid out roughly $250 million in prize money, about 20%. For context, in the NBA and NFL, players collectively earn around 50% of league revenues. Top tennis players are some of the highest profile individual athletes on the planet, operating inside an economic structure that would make most team sport athletes cringe. To be fair, the ATP has made real moves. The Masters 1000 profit-sharing model put a record $18.3 million in players' pockets in 2024. The 2026 season sees that pool growing again to $21.5 million across Masters 1000 events and the ATP Finals. finals. Challenger Tour prize money is up 167% since 2022. These are real, meaningful improvements. But here's the thing that ties it all together. Revenues grow when the biggest draws go deep. The biggest draws go deep more reliably on surfaces that favor those players. So surface homogenization, which benefits tournament organizers, also indirectly benefits the very top of players who are pushing for more money because it extends their runs and pads their earnings. Everyone at the top of the system is being made whole by the same mechanism that is slowly squeezing out the variety that once made tennis genuinely unpredictable. The biggest loser? Probably the player ranked outside the top 150 who would have thrived in those brutal, grinding, slow conditions. The system optimizes for the stars and the shareholders, in that order. Everyone else just makes do. Oh, and one more thing, the switch from Penn to Dunlop balls has also absolutely contributed to the faster conditions this year as well. Penn balls tend to be a bit livelier when new, so the switch to Dunlop is a bit of a head scratcher at first glance. But it's actually all part of the tour's broader push for consistency. Same balls, same surfaces, same outcomes, tournament to tournament, week after week. This is something that some players actually prefer.
We used different balls this year, going from Penn to Dunlop balls. But yeah, I really appreciate when the tournaments kind of all use similar balls, and this year using the same ball throughout the entire swing is so nice.
All in all, keeping things similar between events enables more predictable outcomes, and predictable outcomes are more profitable than unpredictable ones. Simple as that. Now, look, before we go all conspiracy theory on this thing, let's check out the other side of the issue. The counter-arguments are real, and honestly, I couldn't feel like I could make this video without sharing them. The most obvious one, surfaces get updated. That's just how sports work. Equipment evolves, materials improve, and courts that were state-of-the-art in 2000 just aren't going to look the same 25 years later. Nobody argues that Wimbledon should still be using the same grass care techniques from 1977. Progress is progress, and we've got to understand that. The safety argument is also genuinely compelling. Lakehold's cushioning system has real data behind it. A 10% reduction in injury risk matters when you're talking about athletes putting their bodies through 11 months of competition a year. We've watched players like Alcaraz, Djokovic, Arthur Fils, and others miss chunks of the season with physical setbacks. If the surface actually does help keep players on the court longer, that's not a small thing. That's a pretty big deal. There's also the consistency argument. When conditions swing wildly between day and night sessions, which the old plexipave courts at Indian Wells absolutely did, you're essentially running two different tournaments back to back. Players who draw evening slots get a totally different game than those who play in the afternoon heat. Is that fair? You could argue it isn't. And finally, here's the one that doesn't get enough attention, the entertainment argument. Casual viewers, the ones who are still figuring out the sport, tend to engage more with the faster-paced rallies that have clear winners. A 35-shot grind on a slow court is beautiful to a tennis purist. But to someone flipping channels on a Sunday afternoon, it might just look like two people hitting the ball back and forth forever. Faster courts mean more net approaches, more serve and volley moments, more clean winners. That's arguably easier to watch and market. But, and this is a key point, there's a huge difference between homogenizing a surface and updating it. You can resurface a court, improve the cushioning, boost the sustainability credentials, and still maintain what made it distinctive in the first place. The technology absolutely exists to build a modern, safer, more consistent surface that still plays slow. Lakehold even themselves offer a range of court speeds. And the kicker? The decision to make the courts at Indian Wells play faster than the year before wasn't forced on anyone by physics or engineering. That was a choice. So all in all, that's really what we're interrogating here. Not whether Indian Wells deserved new courts, because they probably did. But now what I'm looking at is whether the speed change that came along with it was genuinely about player welfare, or whether it was a convenient side effect that nobody at the tournament was really too upset about. The uncomfortable answer is probably both. And that's the part of the story that rarely makes it into the official press release. The desert has gotten faster, and yeah, there are real, legitimate reasons for that. Better cushioning, better sustainability, better consistency between sessions. None of that is made up. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the money, the patterns, the quiet trend toward homogenization across every major tournament on the calendar, it's hard not to feel like something might have been lost in the process. Indian Wells was the outlier, the anomaly, the court that made big servers sweat and clay court specialists feel right at home in the desert. It forced players to adapt, and sometimes the results were genuinely unpredictable in the best way possible. Now, I'm afraid in the coming years that it might just become another hard court. Faster, cleaner, more marketable, and a little less itself. I wouldn't be surprised if a few years from now, some of those same players who complained about the slow bounce start getting a little nostalgic about it. Because here's the thing about outliers. You don't always know what you had until it's gone.